Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really digging into Dublin, a city that's, well, it's less a fixed point and more like a living, breathing canvas of history. It's just packed with layers and paradoxes, constantly being shaped by everything that came before.
Yeah, it really is.
And we're drawing from this fantastic source material, Dublin, a city in layers, aiming to uncover some surprising facts and maybe some profound insights you won't forget.
Absolutely. And our mission for this deep dive is essentially to journey through Dublin's pretty remarkable evolution. We're talking right from its quite violent outsider-forged origins all the way to its complex modern identity.
Okay.
We want to reveal how past events don't just, sit in history books. They're actively sculpting its present, even now. The goal is for you, the listener, to understand not just what happened, but why it matters, and what it tells us about this fascinating, sometimes turbulent process of urban change.
So Dublin's very foundations are incredibly rich, aren't they? You've got the ancient Irish name, Béal Ethacliath,
Mm,
which means town of the hurdle ford, points to its importance as like an ancient crossing point on the River Liffey.
exactly.
But the city we know today, Dublin, that comes from Dublin, the Black Pool. What's striking, though, is that the city, as an actual urban thing, was really forged by outsiders. How did that actually begin?
It's true, yeah. That story really kicks off in 841 AD. That's when Norse Vikings established what they called a long fort on the south bank of the Liffey.
A long fort. Okay.
Yeah, and you got to picture this. It wasn't really a city yet. Think of it more as a fortified naval camp,
Right, military.
purely military. It was a foothold, basically, designed so they could overwinter launch raids deeper into Ireland. For the Vikings, Dublin was just perfectly situated, this outpost on the western edge of their huge maritime network, a real strategic asset for, well, expansion and plunder.
And when we talk about early Norse Dublin, there was this really grim economic engine driving it, wasn't there? What was that foundational commerce, the thing that built its early wealth?
Yes, and it's a sobering detail. Often
Yeah.
gets kind of glossed over. The grim economic engine of this early Norse settlement was, frankly, human trafficking.
Wow.
It quickly became one of Europe's largest and most notorious slave markets. Captives, mostly seized from Irish monasteries, settlements, were gathered there and shipped out across the wider Scandinavian world. The city's early prosperity was quite literally built on the buying and selling of human lives.
That's it. Yeah, that's heavy. So they were actually expelled for a time, but then the Vikings returned. How did that second wave change things?
They did return, yeah, with force in 917 AD.
Yeah.
And this second foundation, it marked a significant evolution. During their time away, many Vikings had settled in northern England, places like York. And
Oh.
there they've been exposed to more sophisticated ideas of like urban living, town planning, basically.
Right.
They brought these ideas back to Dublin, transformed it from that sort of temporary camp into a more planned town. We know this from the extensive archaeological digs, mostly from the 60s through the early 80s.
What did they find?
They found a structured layout, fenced plots,
Yeah.
distinct house types, even early town defenses, plus loads of scales and decorated weights, clear signs it was becoming a permanent trading center. Commerce was becoming just as important as conflict.
So after a couple of centuries as this thriving kind of Hiberno-Norse city-state, Dublin's next big transformation comes knocking in 1170.
Hmm.
This is when the exiled king of Leinster, Dermot MacMurrough, rocks up back in Ireland with an army of Anglo-Norman mercenaries from Wales. They took Wexford first, right? And then they aimed for Dublin, the biggest prize.
The biggest prize, exactly. And the city eventually fell to the Normans.
But then the English king got involved.
Crucially, yeah, King Henry II of England steps in just a year later, 1171. He was apparently quite alarmed by his ambitious knights carving out kingdoms for themselves.
No, yeah, didn't want them getting too powerful.
Precisely. So he arrived to assert his own sovereignty, declared Dublin a royal city. And this move established it as the center of English government in Ireland, a role it held for the next, 750 years?
7.5 centuries. Wow. And the most powerful symbol, physically and, well, symbolically, of this new colonial order was King John's command in 1204 to build Dublin Castle. What about its location?
Oh, the location was everything, incredibly significant. It was built on that elevated ridge overlooking the Liffey, precisely on the site of the original Viking settlement.
Right on top.
Right on top. This wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate superimposition of new power, physically erasing and replacing the old Viking presence. A real statement.
That shift from Viking to Norman, it seems to reveal this chillingly consistent pattern, doesn't it? Conquerors don't just take land, they rewrite the story to make themselves look good.
Absolutely. It's the classic playbook.
Yeah.
The Normans, for example, they presented their arrival as a civilizing mission. Now, the Vikings had that brutal but effective slave trade. The Normans started freeing the enslaved population.
Sounds good on the surface.
Well, yes, but it wasn't purely humanitarian. It was more a strategic replacement of slavery with feudalism, which, let's be honest, for those at the bottom of society, was often little better than slavery itself.
Right. Still tied to the land, obligations.
Exactly. Yet this act of freeing slaves served as powerful political propaganda, framed their conquest as a moral improvement. This was, the original PR spin for empire, a pattern that would define centuries of British rule and beyond.
So, right from the start, Dublin's identity was forged in this mix of conflict and commerce. It wasn't really an Irish city in those early centuries, more like a colonial bridgehead. That history must create this foundational tension in the city's identity, right? A question of belonging that probably echoes through its later revolutionary period and maybe even today.
Definitely. That tension is always there, under the surface.
Okay, speaking of transformations, let's jump forward quite a bit. To the 18th century, the grandeur of Georgian Dublin. How did the city possibly go from Cromwellian devastation, only 9,000 people apparently, to becoming the second city of the British Empire? That's some turnaround.
It's an astonishing turnaround, yeah. Truly a golden age for the city, architecturally at least.
Yeah.
The engine behind it was the Protestant ascendancy. This was a wealthy, landowning elite, mostly Anglican, who dominated the semi-independent Irish Parliament at the time.
Okay.
They centered their political and social lives in Dublin, the capital, and they poured resources into creating a city that reflected their status, their confidence. This era, roughly 1714 to 1830, gave Dublin its enduring Georgian character. Think grand public works, but also intellectual ferment figures like Jonathan Swift were around then.
And a key instrument in this makeover was the White Streets Commission, set up in 1757. You mentioned this was one of Europe's first modern urban planning authorities. How did they actually reshape the city?
They completely transformed it. Before them, Dublin was still largely a cramped medieval city. Their job was to widen those narrow streets, create grand new thoroughfares, Sackville Street, which is now O'Connell Street, is the prime example, and basically change the city's whole layout, its axis.
Right.
But what's really distinctive, the lasting legacy, are those magnificent residential squares. Parnell Square, Marion Square, Fitzwilliam Square. You know the ones. Uniform terraces of elegant red brick townhouses.
Yeah, beautiful.
Beautiful, yes. But here's where it gets really insightful about the society that built them. The parks at the heart of those squares. They weren't public. No, they were private gardens, enclosed by railings, accessible only to the key-holding residents of the surrounding houses.
Wow. So the design itself was about exclusion.
It physically manifested the exclusivity, the deep social stratification of ascendancy society, a very visible symbol of who belonged and who didn't.
Beyond the squares, the Georgian era gave Dublin some incredible public buildings, too. We're talking masterpieces like James Gandon's Custom House and the Four Courts.
Stunning buildings.
But the Rotunda Hospital, Leinster House, which is now the Irish Parliament, they all have that confident, classical look.
They do. But it raises that important question again, doesn't it? How much was the celebrated beauty of Georgian Dublin inseparable from its function as, well, social engineering? The development wasn't just about aesthetics. It was a deliberate act of creating an exclusive enclave for the ascendancy, physically and socially separating them from the city's poor majority. Those private parks are maybe the most potent symbol of that deliberate inequality.
And all that grandeur, beautiful as it was, it turned out to be built on pretty shaky political ground, didn't it?
Utterly fragile. Dublin's prosperity was absolutely shattered by the 1801 Act of Union. That abolished the Irish Parliament in Dublin, moved power directly to London.
So the reason for the ascendancy to be there vanished.
Exactly. It led to this exodus of the aristocracy, the wealthy landowners, and those grand Georgian townhouses, very quickly subdivided into squalid tenements, housing multiple families in horrific conditions. It just perfectly illustrates how Dublin's fortunes were violently tied to these external political forces. London sneezed, and Dublin caught a catastrophic cold.
That 1801 Act of Union really did send Dublin into a long, slow decline, didn't it? The 19th century sounds like a really painful time for the city.
It truly was, for the vast majority of Dubliners anyway. The reality became one of extreme hardship. The city actually became notorious across Europe for having some of the worst slums imaginable.
Really?
Worse than, say, London.
Arguably, yes, in certain districts. Overcrowding was rampant. Sanitation was almost non-existent in many areas. Disease, especially tuberculosis, was just a scourge. Infant mortality rates were shockingly high.
Grim.
Incredibly grim. And this physical decay, this human misery, it stood in such stark contrast to the architectural grandeur left over from the previous century. It created the city of, as the source calls it, haunting contradictions. And you can imagine how this environment, neglect, poverty, coupled with the lingering trauma of the Great Famine just decades earlier, and the repeated political failures to get home rule through Westminster, how that created fertile ground for more radical nationalism.
Absolutely. It was the perfect breeding ground. A new generation, often educated but seeing no future, organized into groups like the Secret Irish Republican Brotherhood, the IRB, the more public Irish Volunteers, and James Connolly's Socialist Irish Citizen Army. They began to seriously plan for an armed insurrection.
And alongside this political radicalization, there was a cultural movement too, wasn't there?
Yeah, running completely in parallel was this powerful cultural revival. Movements like the Gaelic League, founded by Douglas Hyde, sought to de-Anglicize Ireland. They promoted the Irish language, which was in steep decline, traditional sports like hurling and Gaelic football, Irish music, dance, mythology.
Trying to build a distinct identity.
Exactly. It was a conscious effort to define a unique Irish identity, completely separate from British culture. It shows how cultural nationalism and political nationalism were deeply intertwined. They fed off each other.
So the link between the city's physical state, its degradation, and the rise of this revolutionary feeling was pretty direct then. The 1916 Rising wasn't just some abstract idea cooked up by intellectuals.
No, not at all. It was absolutely forged in the tangible misery of Dublin's tenement slums. The British administration, headquartered right there in Dublin Castle, wasn't just seen as a symbol of foreign rule. For many Dubliners, it was seen as the direct architect of the city's neglect and their suffering.
Right.
So the fight for an Irish Republic became inseparable from the fight for basic human dignity, for better living conditions.
And then, in Easter week of 1916, these simmering tensions just exploded onto the streets of Dublin. The city itself became the stage for this incredibly dramatic, violent struggle. It was a military failure, we know that, but it ultimately transformed Ireland's political landscape forever. What was the thinking behind the targets the rebels chose? The symbolism there.
That's a great question, because the symbolism was crucial. On Easter Monday, April 24th, forces mainly from the Irish Volunteers and the smaller Irish Citizen Army seized key locations right across Dublin. The most famous, obviously, is the General Post Office, the GPO, on Sackville Street.
Where Pierce read the proclamation.
Exactly. From the steps of the GPO, Patrick Pearse read out the proclamation of the Irish Republic. But they didn't just take the GPO. They also occupied the Four Courts, Boland's Mill, the South Dublin Union. Strategic points.
Yeah.
By doing this, they weren't just taking buildings, they were symbolically seizing the entire apparatus of the British state in Ireland. The city itself became the medium for their revolutionary message.
But militarily, it was doomed from the start, wasn't it? The numbers were just stacked against them.
Hopelessly stacked. The rebels probably numbered little more than 1,000, maybe 1,500 fighting men and women in total. Against them, the British eventually brought in over 20,000 soldiers, plus artillery, even a gunboat on the Liffey.
Wow.
After 6 days of intense fighting, which saw much of the city center, especially around Sackville Street, reduced to rubble by shelling and fires, the rebels were forced into unconditional surrender. The rising resulted in around 500 deaths, and tragically, most of those were civilians caught in the crossfire.
And initially, the reaction from Dubliners wasn't supportive, was it?
No. Initially, it was deeply unpopular with many Dubliners. There was anger about the destruction, the deaths, the disruption to food supplies. Some rebels were even jeered by crowds as they were marched away.
But then came the British response.
Yes. And here's where the story takes that critical, pivotal turn. The British military commander, General Maxwell, opted for swift, harsh retribution. In the weeks that followed, the authorities court-martialed 90 rebels and sentenced them to death. 15 of the key leaders were executed by firing squad in the Stonebreakers Yard at Kilmainham Jail.
Kilmainham Jail, a place already steeped in Republican history.
Exactly. And this act, this series of executions, proved to be a catastrophic miscalculation by the British. It completely transformed public opinion. The defeated, unpopular rebels were suddenly turned into national martyrs. Figures like Pearse, James Connolly, Tom Clark. They were immortalized.
Nationalist sentiment, which had been maybe lukewarm about the rising itself, was absolutely galvanized across the country, and Kilmainham Jail became, as the source says, a sacred place of national memory.
You really see that shift in the next big election, the 1918 general election. Sinn Féin, the party most associated with the Rising's ideals, won this landslide victory in Ireland.
A total landslide. They refused to take their seats in Westminster, of course. Instead, they established their own independent Irish parliament, Dáil Éireann, right there in Dublin's Mansion House in January 1919. And the Irish Volunteers, now reconstituted as the Irish Republican Army, or IRA, began a guerrilla war against British forces, the War of Independence. And Dublin was a central, brutal theater for that conflict.
And that war had incredibly dark moments, like Bloody Sunday in 1920.
Yeah, November 21st, 1920. A
What?
truly infamous day. It started in the morning when Michael Collins's IRA intelligence unit, known as the Squad, assassinated 14 British intelligence officers or suspected agents at various locations across Dublin. A devastating blow to British intelligence.
But the retaliation was swift and brutal.
Horrifyingly so. That afternoon, British auxiliary forces, the notorious Oxys and Black and Tans, drove armored cars onto the pitch at Croke Park during a major Gaelic football match between Dublin and Tipperary. They opened fire indiscriminately into the crowd. 14 civilians were killed, including one of the players. It horrified public opinion, both in Ireland and internationally, and just crystallized the vicious nature of the conflict.
Eventually, by mid-1921, the British government agreed to a truce, leading to negotiations. The resulting Anglo-Irish Treaty created the Irish Free State, though controversially, it partitioned Ireland and required an oath of allegiance to the British monarch. But there was this incredibly symbolic moment on January 16, 1922, the handover of Dublin Castle.
Yes, a moment of immense symbolic power. The last British viceroy formally handed over Dublin Castle, the very heart of British rule for over 700 years, to Michael Collins, the head of the new Irish Provisional Government. It marked the definitive end of one era and, well, the turbulent, violent beginning of another, because the treaty immediately led to the Irish Civil War.
Right. And this whole period, 1916 to 1922, its legacy is still debated, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It raises this important question. What is the contested legacy? For decades after independence, the 1916 Rising was largely enshrined in this heroic, almost unquestioned nationalist narrative. But then from the 1960s onwards, you had the rise of revisionist historians who began to challenge that narrative, questioning the morality of the rebels' violence, the democratic mandate, looking at the human cost.
And that academic debate got tangled up with the Troubles in Northern Ireland?
Intensely politicized, yes. When the Troubles erupted in Northern Ireland in 1969, the Provisional IRA explicitly claimed the 1916 proclamation as justification for their own armed struggle. This forced a really difficult reckoning in the Republic with the state's own violent origins. The battle for Dublin streets in 1916 was really followed by this century-long battle for its meaning, its interpretation, and that debate continues to shape Irish politics and identity even today.
Now, for most of its history as an independent state, Ireland was actually one of the poorer countries in Western Europe, economically quite stagnant for decades. But that changed with astonishing speed from the mid-1990s onwards. The term Celtic Tiger was coined, describing this period of unprecedented, rapid economic growth that just transformed the nation's economy, and especially the fabric of Dublin. Between 1995 and 2000, Ireland's economy grew at this staggering average annual rate of 9.4%. What on earth caused that?
Yeah, it was genuinely astonishing growth. This economic miracle, as it was called, certainly wasn't accidental, though. There were several key drivers coming together. A really big one was Ireland's remarkably low 12.5% corporate tax rate.
Ah, the famous low tax rate.
The famous low tax rate. It proved incredibly effective in attracting huge amounts of foreign direct investment, or FDI, especially from American tech giants. Intel, Microsoft, Dell, and pharmaceutical companies. This was complemented by decades of strategic government investment in free, secondary, and third-level education. This produced one of Europe's best educated, youngest, and crucially, English-speaking workforces.
Ready for those tech jobs.
Absolutely ready. Then you had EU membership, which was vital. It provided access to the huge European single market, plus significant EU structural funds and agricultural subsidies, which helped modernize the country. And finally, there were these things called social partnership agreements, basically deals between the government, employers, and trade unions, which delivered wage moderation and industrial peace, creating a stable economic environment attractive to investors.
And you could really see the newfound wealth being inscribed onto Dublin's landscape, couldn't you? There was a national development plan, huge investment in infrastructure.
Massive investment. Major projects that Dubliners had dreamed about for decades finally happened. Things like the Lutus light rail system, the Dublin Port Tunnel to take trucks out of the city center, upgrades to the airport. The city's skyline started to change dramatically too, cranes everywhere. And the Spire of Dublin, that huge needle erected on O'Connell Street in 2003, became this sort of bold, maybe slightly controversial, symbol of this new, modern, confident Ireland.
But here's where it gets really interesting, or maybe worrying. In its later stages, say from around 2004 onwards, the boom became increasingly dependent on something else, didn't it?
It did. It became dangerously dependent on a massive construction and property bubble.
Right.
Fueled by incredibly lax lending by the banks, generous tax incentives for property development and investment, and this widespread, almost feverish belief that property prices could only ever go up. House prices in Dublin, for instance, basically doubled between 2000 and 2006. It created enormous paper wells, but it was also sowing the seeds for a truly devastating crash.
So the Celtic Tiger ended up being this kind of double-edged sword of globalization. It tied Ireland's economy so directly to the global financial system
Inextricably linked.
that when the international credit markets froze up and the global financial crisis hit hard in 2008, the pillars supporting the Irish boom cheap international credit, booming construction just crumbled almost overnight, which is why the subsequent crash here was so particularly catastrophic.
Exactly. The fall was as dramatic as the rise.
So as Ireland slowly started to emerge from the wreckage of that 2008 crash, its recovery was, perhaps predictably, once again driven by foreign direct investment. But this time there was a real laser focus on the tech sector, and specifically on transforming one part of the capital, Dublin's derelict docklands.
Yeah, that area had a long history of decline. For much of the 20th century, Dublin's docklands, once this bustling hub of maritime trade, had become really a landscape of industrial decay. Just empty warehouses, contaminated land, a real symbol of neglect. But back in 1997, the government had actually established this powerful urban development agency, the Dublin Docklands Development Authority, the DDDA. It had this ambitious mandate to basically rebuild the entire area, about 520 hectares.
And the pivotal moment, the real game changer for that area, came in the early 2000s, didn't it? When the big American tech giants started looking at it for their European headquarters.
Absolutely. Google's arrival in 2004, when they bought and then developed the Monte Vetro building in the Grand Canal dock area, is widely seen as the Google game changer. It was the seismic shift that really put the Dublin Docklands on the map for Silicon Valley.
And once Google was in,
Everyone followed. Following Google's lead, other major firms like Facebook, now Meta, LinkedIn, Twitter, now X, Airbnb, they all established major operations nearby, creating this dense cluster of tech activity.
and the name Silicon Docks started appearing.
Yeah, exactly. That name popped up around the time the economy began to recover, maybe 2011, 2012 onwards, really cementing the area's new identity as Ireland's and maybe Europe's premier tech hub.
And the success was built on that familiar formula.
Pretty much the tried and tested Celtic Tiger formula, yeah. Ireland's low 12.5% corporate tax rate was still the headline attraction. Plus, that talented English-speaking workforce, relatively lenient work visa policies for skilled tech workers from outside the EU, proactive government agencies like IDA Ireland actively courting these companies, and crucially for the Docklands, the designation of the area as a Strategic Development Zone, or SDZ.
What did that mean, the SDZ?
It basically meant fast-track planning approval, cut through a lot of the usual red tape and potential objections, allowing these large office blocks to get built much more quickly.
Okay, that sounds like a clear recipe for economic success, bringing in jobs, investment. But what does it all mean for the city's original inhabitants? This regeneration of the Docklands, it stands as a pretty stark case study in, well, state-facilitated gentrification, doesn't it? Raising that critical question, regeneration for whom?
It's such an important question. Because while Silicon Docks is an undeniable economic success story in terms of jobs and tax revenue, it has created, or at least exacerbated, deep social divides. The Docklands area, places like Rings End and Pierce Street, were historically working-class communities, often with high unemployment, especially after the traditional port industries declined.
Right.
And despite this explosion of high-skilled, high-paying jobs literally on their doorstep within Silicon Docks, studies have shown persistent high levels of unemployment among local residents. There seems to be this profound disconnect between the glittering new economy and the old community living right beside it. It's had a significant polarizing effect, creating almost two Dublins side by side.
And the economic successes of this post-crash era, largely centered on Silicon Docks and FDI, they've definitely come at a profound social cost elsewhere in the city, too. Dublin today is gripped by this severe, protracted housing crisis, which feels like a direct consequence of this development model, doesn't it? How's that actually playing out for ordinary Dubliners?
Oh, the manifestations of the crisis are just stark, and they affect almost everyone who isn't a high earner or already owning property. You have soaring rents now averaging, believe it or not, at least 10% higher than they were at the absolute peak of the Celtic Tiger property bubble.
Wow. Higher than the peak.
Higher than the peak. There's a chronic shortage of properties available to rent or buy at affordable levels, severe overcrowding in rental accommodation, and, most tragically, a deeply troubling rise in homelessness, particularly among families with children who simply cannot find anywhere to live.
And a key driver of this, according to the source material, has been what's called the financialization of the private rental sector. What does that actually mean?
Essentially, it means that Dublin's housing market, especially the rental sector,
Yeah.
particularly after the 2008 crash when property values plummeted, became a prime investment target for massive global institutional investors. Think huge private equity firms, real estate investment trusts, what many people in Ireland call vulture funds. These aren't your traditional local landlords. They're huge international corporations buying up vast portfolios of apartments, sometimes entire apartment blocks, often from distressed banks or developers, and their primary motive is maximizing returns for their shareholders, not providing long-term housing. They often use strategies described as predatory, like gentrification by upgrading, maybe doing minor refurbishments to justify steep rent increases and push out lower-income tenants.
So what's the impact then on specific historic communities? The source mentions the Liberties as a key example.
Yeah, the Liberties is one of Dublin's oldest, most historically significant, traditionally working-class neighborhoods.
Right.
Right in the heart of the city. And it's now experiencing intense development pressure. You see large hotels, luxury student accommodation blocks going up everywhere, often replacing older housing or small businesses.
Changing the whole character?
Completely changing the social profile, displacing many long-term residents who can no longer afford to live there. And it's eroding local culture. Community assets, things that hold a neighborhood together, like playgrounds, local football pitches, they're being lost to more profitable commercial development.
And critics argue this crisis isn't just bad luck, it's a direct result of government policy choices over decades.
That's certainly the argument made by many housing campaigners and academics, yeah. The critique is that the Irish state has largely withdrawn from the direct construction of social housing on a large scale, which it used to do. Instead, policy was focused more on subsidizing tenants to help them pay rent in the private market through schemes like the Housing Assistance Payment, or HAP.
Which pushes rents up further.
Which critics argue just inflates rents further and subsidizes private landlords. And policy has also focused on facilitating private development, often by selling off public land cheaply to developers. This whole approach really reflects a kind of neoliberal urban planning model that prioritizes private capital and market solutions over viewing housing as a fundamental public good or human right.
And if we connect this back to the bigger picture, this isn't just an economic or social issue, is it? It's described as an acute cultural crisis, too.
Absolutely. Because the displacement of these long-standing communities, driven by gentrification and the housing crisis, leads to the irreversible erasure of Dublin's intangible cultural heritage. We're not just talking about losing old buildings. We're talking about the loss of unique Dublin accents, local stories, traditions, social networks that have built up over generations. Even specific cultural practices, like the famous horse culture associated with parts of the inner city like the Liberties. And the closure of traditional pubs and local shops isn't just an economic loss. It destroys those vital third spaces, places outside home and work, where community life actually happens, where social cohesion is built. This whole process risks creating a more sanitized, homogenized city. It might look shiny and be more profitable for some, but it's stripped of its authentic soul, its grit, its character.
So the very economic model driving Dublin's recent success seems to be fueling a crisis that threatens its long-term appeal and livability. It feels like a self-defeating cycle.
It does feel like a deeply problematic, potentially self-defeating cycle, yeah.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit, but stay with culture. More than perhaps any other city in the world, Dublin's identity feels inextricably bound up with its literary heritage. It's staggering, really. The city has produced 4 Nobel Prize laureates in literature: Yeats, George Bernard Shaw, Samuel Beckett, Seamus Heaney.
Incredible list.
And that's before you even get to icons like Oscar Wilde, Jonathan Swift, and of course James Joyce. This extraordinary legacy was formally recognized in 2010 when Dublin was designated a UNESCO City of Literature.
And it's so deserved. Because in the works of these writers, Dublin isn't just, a passive backdrop. It's often a living and breathing character in its own right.
Right.
The ultimate example has to be James Joyce's Ulysses. It meticulously maps a single day, June 16, 1904, Bloomsday, in the life of Leopold Bloom, but also in the life of Dublin itself. Every street corner, every pub, the smell of the Liffey, the sounds of the city, they all become part of this epic, almost mythological journey through the city's soul. That's how deeply intertwined the city and its literature are.
And that powerful tradition continues right into the 21st century, doesn't it? You have contemporary authors like Sally Rooney, whose novels often use Dublin as the setting to explore the lives of a new generation. Irish millennials navigating adulthood, relationships, class, often in a post-crash world. For her characters, the city seems to represent this complex transition, a place of opportunity, maybe, but also alienation.
Yeah, she captures that modern Dublin experience really well. And what's so truly fascinating here, I think, is that to experience Dublin, especially if you have any interest in literature, is to navigate a city that exists on multiple planes at once.
How do you mean?
Well, the source calls it a palimpsest of literary ghosts. The physical city of today is constantly overlaid with the literary city of the past. A walk through its streets becomes this kind of dialogue across time. Landmarks get imbued with this layered meaning. So Hodges Figg's bookstore on Dawson Street isn't just a shop. It's this powerful symbol of Dublin's literary heritage, having appeared in novels across generations, including Ulysses. A dart stop at Sandy Cove isn't just a station. It's linked to the Martello Tower where Ulysses begins.
Right, it adds depth.
It creates this unique cultural density where the past is always present, not like a static museum piece, but as this living echo that enriches and sometimes complicates the contemporary experience of the city. It's quite magical, actually.
Beyond the books and the writers, there's another Dublin institution. The pub. Far more complex, more significant than the sort of cheerful stereotype often marketed to tourists, right? Historically, it was described as the secular heart of the community.
Absolutely. A social institution that, in its importance to daily life for many, was ranked second only perhaps to the local parish church.
Wow. Where did it come from?
Well, its origins can arguably be traced way back to Roman tabernae, maybe early medieval alehouses, which were often run by women, known as alewives. But by the 19th century, the pub had really evolved into the kind of community center we might recognize today. Although it strongly reflected social hierarchies back then, you had the dusky watering holes for laborers, and then the much more elegant Victorian gin palaces with ornate fittings for the middle classes and gentry.
And it was very much a male space for a long time.
Predominantly male, yes, for centuries. Women were often not welcome in the main bar, or if they were, they might be confined to the snug. That small, private room with its own serving hatch, offering a degree of privacy or perhaps segregation.
But beyond just being a place to drink, the pub was also this vital hub for cultural and political activity.
Hugely important. It was, and still is in many places, a key venue for traditional Irish music sessions. The trad session is iconic. But historically, it also served as a clandestine meeting place for revolutionaries. Michael Collins and Arthur Griffith were famously regulars at Davy Byrne's pub off Grafton Street during the War of Independence, apparently conducting revolutionary business there.
So what does this all mean for its cultural significance beyond the politics?
Well, it was famously the unofficial headquarters of Dublin's literary world, too. Writers from James Joyce and Flann O'Brien to Patrick Kavanagh and Brendan Behan were legendary patrons, immortalizing their favorite establishments in their work, holding court, engaging in lively, drunken debates. The Dublin pub is just this perfect example of what sociologists call a third space.
A third space.
Yeah, a critical anchor of community life that exists apart from the primary environments of home, the first space, and work's the second space. It's far more than just a place to buy alcohol. It's the community's living room, a place for socializing, information exchange, mutual support. And that's why the erosion of these traditional local pubs, often through gentrification, rising rents, changing social habits, represents the loss of this vital social infrastructure. It genuinely threatens the social cohesion that has long defined Dublin's neighborhood life.
Now, there's one area of Dublin that really seems to encapsulate the city's modern identity crisis, especially around culture and tourism. Temple Bar. It's designated as Dublin's cultural quarter. It's one of the biggest tourist draws, hugely famous internationally. But it's also the subject of intense local criticism. How did this area become such a paradox?
Temple Bar's story is fascinating. It has a really rich history. Its oldest medieval street pattern dates back to the Vikings. But after a long period of decline in the 20th century, the entire district was actually purchased by the State Transport Company, CIA, with the firm intention of demolishing it completely to build a massive central bus station right in the heart of the city.
Wow, really? Demolish the whole thing?
The whole thing. But because demolition was imminent, rents became incredibly cheap. And this period of neglect, ironically, attracted this vibrant, ad hoc, sort of bohemian community of artists, musicians, small independent shops, galleries, setting up in the decaying buildings.
Yeah.
An organic cultural hub started to emerge precisely because it was neglected.
But then the plans change.
Massively changed. In a landmark policy reversal in the late 1980s, the Irish government, particularly under the influence of the then Taoiseach, Charles High, decided not to demolish it, but instead to preserve the area and actively regenerate it as a flagship cultural quarter. This state-supported project, Temple Bar Properties, was set up. It invested heavily, refurbished buildings, pedestrianized streets, and attracted important cultural institutions like the Irish Film Institute, the Project Arts Center, the Gallery of Photography. It was hailed internationally at the time as this model of culture-led urban regeneration.
Sounds like a success story then.
Wow. Here's where it gets really interesting and really contested. For many Dubliners and even some visitors now, the project's overwhelming success has actually been its undoing. The area is now widely seen, especially at night and weekends, as an overpriced tourist trap, often dominated by, frankly, drunken stag and hen parties.
Right. The party central reputation.
Exactly. Critics argue it now presents this very sanitized, commodified, and often quite stereotypical version of Irish culture, a phenomenon sometimes dubbed Disneyfication or paddywhackery. The authentic live traditional music blasting from almost every pub, the ubiquity of shops selling, leprechaun-themed souvenirs. It's seen by many as a performance purely for tourist consumption, rather than genuine organic cultural expression.
So Temple Bar becomes this kind of cautionary tale.
It really does. A cautionary tale where the state's well-intentioned effort to preserve and institutionalize the organic, bohemian culture that had sprung up inadvertently created the economic conditions, soaring rents, intense commercial pressure that ultimately displaced much of that very culture. It was replaced by a more profitable, centrally managed, tourist-focused model. The cultural quarter became in many ways a victim of its own success, and it really reflects Ireland's broader ongoing struggle with how to manage tourism and present its national identity to a globalized world without just selling a stereotype.
Let's talk food. Because for much of the 20th century, Irish cuisine had this, well, let's be honest, pretty terrible reputation internationally.
Yeah.
Often dismissed as just boiled potatoes, overcooked meat, cabbage.
Bland and boring, yeah.
That reputation, though, it was rooted in a really complex history, wasn't it? Shaped by colonialism, centuries of poverty for the majority, and especially the deep trauma of the Great Famine, which wiped out not just people, but also a lot of culinary knowledge and diversity. But today, Dublin's food scene tells a dramatically different story, one of transformation and real national confidence.
Absolutely. The catalyst for this culinary revolution, like so many things, was really the economic boom of the Celtic Tiger in the 1990s. For the first time, large numbers of ordinary Irish people had the disposable income to travel widely.
Right. They experienced other food cultures.
Exactly. They went to Spain, Italy, France, Asia. They came back with expanded palates and this new demand for international cuisines, for different flavors, for better quality ingredients. This really helped transform Ireland into kind of a foodie nation, surprisingly quickly.
And Dublin today, it's quietly emerged as one of Europe's most exciting and dynamic food cities, hasn't it?
It really has. Its culinary landscape is remarkably diverse now. You've got everything from Michelin-starred fine dining establishments showcasing incredible Irish produce to traditional pubs doing really high-quality gastropub food, and this vibrant, multicultural scene of casual eateries, fantastic Thai, Vietnamese, Indian, Middle Eastern, you name it. Neighborhoods like Georgia Street, Camden Street, they've become real culinary hubs, buzzing with energy and showcasing the city's new, fashionable food culture.
But it's not just about international food, is it? There's been a rediscovery of Irish food itself.
Yes, and this is maybe the most fascinating part. This evolution has also involved this profound rediscovery and reimagining of Irish food.
A new generation of talented, confident Irish chefs is moving way beyond the old stereotypes. They're passionately championing high-quality, seasonal, locally sourced Irish produce, things like artisan cheeses, heritage vegetables, and especially the country's exceptional seafood, which, bizarrely, was often historically underappreciated at home.
Right, exported rather than eaten.
Largely, yeah. But this new Irish cuisine isn't about some nostalgic, backward-looking return to the past. It's about confidently taking the best local ingredients and fusing them with global techniques and influences, creating something distinctly modern, vibrant, and delicious.
So this journey from that old meat and potatoes reputation to this dynamic, internationally recognized food destination, it kind of mirrors Ireland's broader social and cultural transformation, doesn't it?
It's a perfect reflection, yeah. The evolution of the food on Dublin's plates powerfully mirrors the nation's journey from a somewhat impoverished, inward-looking past to becoming this confident, multicultural, outward-looking, modern European country. You can taste the change.
Okay, let's look specifically at tourism now, the industry itself. Dublin's position today as a leading global tourist destination isn't an accident. It's the result of decades of pretty strategic planning and sophisticated marketing, isn't it?
Oh, very much so. This effort is spearheaded by two key state agencies working together. You have Celtic Ireland, which is the National Tourism Development Authority. They focus on developing the tourism product, quality control, supporting businesses within Ireland.
Okay.
And then you have Tourism Ireland, which is the all-island marketing body, tasked specifically with marketing the island of Ireland to both north and south to overseas visitors. They run the big international campaigns.
And Celtic Ireland has a current strategy specifically for the capital.
Yes, the Dublin City Destination and Experience Development Plan, running from 2023 to 2027. It's a 5-year roadmap, and it really emphasizes the need for sustainable, year-round tourism. The focus is shifting towards ensuring tourism benefits local communities as much as it does visitors and businesses, spreading the benefits beyond the absolute city center, and developing experiences that encourage longer stays.
And Tourism Ireland, what are their big campaigns globally?
Tourism Ireland executes these highly targeted global marketing campaigns. A recent major one was called Ireland Unrushed. This positions the island for what's called slow tourism, encouraging visitors to take their time, connect more deeply with the landscape, culture, local people, rather than just ticking off sites.
Trying to get away from the whistle-stop tour idea?
Exactly. And this runs alongside their long-standing, very successful global brand campaign, Fill Your Heart with Ireland, which focuses more on the emotional connection and the welcome.
And the strategies are working, judging by the numbers. What does the data show for recent years?
The data shows a strong recovery after the pandemic. For 2024, Ireland saw around 6.6 million overseas visitors, generating a very significant $6.03 billion in revenue for the economy. The North American market, the U.S. and Canada, is particularly crucial and now accounts for a massive 36% of all tourism spending, even though they represent a smaller percentage of visitor numbers. They tend to stay longer and spend more per day.
So what does this all mean for the future of Dublin's visitor economy? Are there challenges lurking beneath those healthy headline figures?
There definitely are some underlying challenges, yes. One interesting trend is a notable drop in the average length of stay, particularly among European visitors compared to pre-pandemic levels. So while more people might be coming overall, they seem to be staying for shorter periods, which impacts the total spend per visitor. And capacity constraints are becoming a really significant concern for the industry, particularly the passenger cap at Dublin Airport, which limits the number of passengers the airport can handle annually. The airlines and tourism bodies see this as potentially limiting future growth, while environmental groups and some local residents see it as necessary. It's a real point of tension. There's also a risk, perhaps, of over-concentration on that very valuable North American market. If anything were to happen to disrupt travel from there, it would have a disproportionate impact.
Okay, let's talk about what people actually come to see. Dublin's tourism appeal is really anchored by this collection of world-class attractions, drawing millions each year. Each tells a distinct part of the Dublin story. Let's explore a few of the big ones.
Right. Well, you have to start with the Guinness Storehouse at St. James's Gate. Opened back in 2000, it is just a masterclass in modern brand tourism.
It's incredibly popular, isn't it? Often Ireland's top fee-paying attraction.
Consistently, yeah.
Yeah.
Housed in a former fermentation plant, so it has that historic industrial vibe. It's welcomed over 20 million visitors by 2019. The whole experience guides visitors through the history of Guinness, the brewing process, though it's not the main brewery tour. It's iconic advertising. culminating, famously, at the gravity bar at the top.
With the panoramic views and the complimentary pint.
Exactly. It's brilliantly executed.
Then, at the complete opposite end of the cultural spectrum, you have the Book of Kells.
A total contrast. Housed in the magnificent old library building at Trinity College, Dublin, right in the city center. This breathtakingly beautiful illuminated manuscript of the Four Gospels, created by monks around 800 AD. It's a genuine national treasure, a globally significant artifact of early medieval art. Understandably, it attracts over 500,000 visitors every year, queuing to glimpse its pages.
Then there's Dublin Castle. We talked about its origins. It embodies the city's political history, doesn't it?
Absolutely. For over 700 years, it was the fortified seat of English and then British administration in Ireland, the symbol of colonial power. Today, parts of it are still used for major government functions, state receptions, and inaugurations, but it's also a key tourist attraction. You can tour the opulent state apartments, see the Gothic Revival Chapel Royal, and even see excavated remains of the original medieval fortress and the Viking settlement beneath. History in layers, literally.
And finally, no site tells the story of the struggle for Irish independence more powerfully than Kilmainham Jail.
Chillingly powerful. Opened in 1796, this former prison housed leaders and participants from almost every Irish rebellion from the United Irishmen in 1798 through Robert Emmet, the Fenians, Parnell, right up to the War of Independence. But it's most famous, of course, as the site of the executions of the leaders of the 1916 Easter Rising.
Which turned them into martyrs.
Exactly. The jail was decommissioned in 1924, fell into ruin, but was then painstakingly restored by volunteers and opened as a museum and national monument in 1966 for the 50th anniversary of the Rising. A visit there is a profoundly moving experience.
So what's truly fascinating here when you look at these key attractions is that they represent this really interesting spectrum of, well, authenticity, don't they?
That's a great way to put it, a spectrum of authenticity. The Book of Kells and Kilmainham Jail derive their immense power from their direct, unmediated connection to the past. They're authentic historical artifacts and sites of profound national memory. Their value is intrinsic. The Guinness Storehouse, by contrast, is a brilliant and hugely successful modern creation. While it's located in a historic building, the experience itself is a curated brand experience. It's a museum about Guinness, celebrating the brand, not really a tour of the actual working brewery itself.
It's manufactured heritage in a way, but very effective.
Very effective. And Dublin Castle sits somewhere in between an authentic historic site, but also actively used and presented in a specific way today. This diversity, this spectrum, is actually a key strength of Dublin's tourism offering. It shows the different ways heritage can be defined, interpreted, and packaged for consumption in the 21st century.
So as Dublin's tourism industry continues its strong recovery and looks to grow, it faces this critical challenge. How do you balance that economic success with social and environmental responsibility, especially given the clear pressures on infrastructure, housing, and maybe local quality of life?
It's the crunch question for Dublin, and for many successful cities globally. A 2023 Dublin City Council survey of residents actually highlighted this tension. While most Dubliners felt domestic tourism, at least, was generally good for the city, a significant minority reported experiencing problems. The biggest issues cited were crowding and congestion. 69% of those reporting problems mentioned that.
Okay.
But also, significantly, the perceived impact on the rising cost of living, mentioned by 56%, and increased housing prices, 55%. So there's a clear perception among a large group of residents that tourism is contributing to the affordability crisis.
So in response, Ireland's tourism authorities say they're placing sustainability right at the heart of their future strategies. They use this VICE framework.
Yes, VICE. It stands for balancing the needs of the visitor, the industry, the community, and the environment. It's a framework for trying to achieve more sustainable tourism development.
And what are some key initiatives under that?
Well, Filt Ireland has launched a climate action program aiming to support tourism businesses across the country in reducing their carbon emissions, improving energy efficiency, waste management, things like that. There's also a growing focus on community engagement, trying to genuinely empower local Dubliners to have a say in tourism development in their areas, conducting more research into residents' attitudes, trying to ensure benefits are shared more widely. And efforts are also underway to improve accessibility and inclusion in tourism for people with disabilities.
Those sound like positive steps. But despite this, Dublin currently ranks only 29th out of 40 major cities on the Global Destination Sustainability Movement Index. What does that ranking tell us?
Well, 29th out of 40. It tells us there's considerable room for improvement, particularly in translating those strategies and frameworks into concrete, measurable actions and outcomes on the ground. The intentions might be good, but implementation seems to be lagging behind some other leading cities.
And this raises maybe a more fundamental question or tension, doesn't it? Between the traditional model of tourism growth, which basically measures success in ever-increasing visitor numbers and revenue, and the goal of creating a truly sustainable sector.
Exactly. There's a fundamental tension emerging there. The debate raging right now over whether to lift the passenger cap at Dublin Airport perfectly encapsulates this conflict. The airline industry, parts of the tourism industry, some business groups, they see the cap as a major constraint on economic growth. They want it lifted or significantly increased.
But others disagree.
But from a sustainability perspective, environmental groups, some local residents, even some transport planners, limiting capacity could be a necessary tool to manage environmental impacts, like carbon emissions and noise pollution, and also to prevent the negative social impacts of over-tourism, like congestion and pressure on housing. Dublin is really at a crossroads here. It faces a fundamental choice. Does it continue to prioritize quantitative growth above all else, or does it make a decisive shift towards a more qualitative, sustainable model of tourism that explicitly values the well-being of residents and the health of the environment alongside economic returns?
It's a huge question. So, wrapping up, Dublin is truly a city defined by its layers, isn't it? Its story isn't simple, not linear. It's this complex palimpsest, like you said, where the echoes of Viking raiders, Norman lords, Georgian aristocrats, Republican revolutionaries, they all resonate in the streets of this modern globalized metropolis. From its origins as, let's face it, a fortified slave port, through its time as the second city of a vast empire, to its rebirth as the capital of an independent, sometimes struggling republic, Dublin seems to have been in this state of constant, often quite violent reinvention.
Absolutely. And the late 20th and early 21st centuries have just brought another wave of transformation, arguably as profound as any in its long past. Those economic booms, the Celtic Tiger, the rise of Silicon Docks, they fundamentally reshaped its skyline, its economy, integrating Dublin deeply into the flows of global capital and technology. And this has brought unprecedented prosperity for some, certainly a new cosmopolitan confidence you can feel in the city's vibrant cultural life, from its world-class literary scene, as we discussed, to its dynamic and diverse food culture.
Yeah.
This latest reinvention has clearly come at a significant cost, creating new and deep-seated tensions.
Yeah, it feels like the very forces driving its economic success, that heavy reliance on foreign direct investment, the booming visitor economy, have simultaneously fueled this devastating housing crisis, leading to gentrification, the displacement of the very historic communities that give the city so much of its unique character, its soul. The celebrated regeneration of areas like the Docklands or Temple Bar, they raise these really difficult questions about who the city is actually for. Can authentic local culture really survive in an urban landscape that seems increasingly tailored to the needs of multinational corporations and international tourists? Dublin is definitely not a museum piece, is it? It's not frozen in its celebrated past. It's a living, breathing, and often really contentious urban space.
So what does this all mean for you as a listener, maybe thinking about Dublin or cities in general? Dublin today is just fascinating because it embodies these profound contradictions. It's a place of immense historical depth that is relentlessly focused on the future. It's a hub of global innovation that is simultaneously struggling with deep local inequalities. It's a cultural mecca that constantly risks commodifying the very identity it seeks to celebrate. Its future, you feel, will be defined by its ability, or perhaps its inability, to somehow reconcile these contradictions. To build a future that is not only prosperous, but also genuinely equitable and sustainable for all its citizens, not just a select few. Dublin remains, as it always seems to have been, this vibrant, sometimes maddening, but always compelling case study in constant, turbulent urban motion. A story that resonates far beyond Ireland's shores.